Welcome back to Monday Musings, a casual conversation about culture and theology. I'm Justin Ely.
And I'm Daniel Chen. We're just a couple guys talking about some stuff.
The stuff we're going to talk about today is wading into a good bit of cultural controversy. We're going to talk about the overturning of Roe versus Wade.
Yeah.
So I'm imagining this one's going to be a long one.
I think this will be a long one. I think this one will be... It should not be polarizing if you're a Christian, but polarizing in our culture.
Yep.
And, you know, I think it's one of those things that we've talked about this some where we've joked about getting canceled and stuff. But I'm like, I am willing to stand my ground on this one.
Absolutely.
And so I think that's what we're going to do today. So we're going to talk about kind of what you've kind of generally led our church through and how we should be seeing Roe v. Wade. But
yeah, we're going to talk about how Christians should respond to the overturning of Roe versus Wade and the Supreme Court decision, the Dobbs decision they recently released. But before we get there, Life Hack of the Month.
Man, I'm very excited about this.
It's been a while.
It has, yeah. So we've been going every other week through the summer.
Yep.
I guess starting in August, maybe we'll be back on a weekly schedule.
Something like that, yeah.
And but I've heard a lot of people tell me they like the life hack.
They miss it.
I've kind of missed it. So.
Yeah.
What you got? Start?
Yeah, of course.
So my life hack. So my birthday was a couple days ago.
Happy birthday!
And my dad's birthday.
And your anniversary's today.
And my anniversary's today. Yeah.
What year?
8 years.
8 years.
Yeah. So good for my wife for staying with me for 8
Good for Meredith.
for 8 years.
Thank you, Meredith.
But yeah, so my birthday is July 7th. My dad's is actually July 14th, and so we always celebrate in between. And so this is a life hack that my wife showed me yesterday. So we were celebrating both of our birthdays. She had made this, multi-tiered chocolate cake, except for part of the cake stuck to the pan, and it was like it was kind of like a, in her mind, it was a disaster moment. To me,
right.
I'm like,
Whatever.
just take
Just
the
rip
broken part and put it together.
Yeah.
Apparently, you're not supposed to do that. This is why I don't ever bake in my house. One of many reasons. But all she did was, and here's the life hack: when you have like a broken cake, you don't have to throw away the cake and make a new cake. She just broke it into more pieces, put it in a trifle thing, mixed it with like a layer of cake, a layer of ice cream, a layer of Oreos, and then a layer of cake, a layer of ice cream, a layer of Oreos, and she made whipped cream, put it in the freezer.
Genius.
And it was so much better than a cake.
Genius.
And so that's the life hack. You can repurpose a cake that's a little messed up into a different and, dare I say, better dessert.
And if you want to take that as an analogy for how you can repair your broken life, you could also do that.
You can do that.
Take the broken pieces and make something better.
Yes.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
My life hack of the month is a person named Oscar. So, we just moved into a new house, and we've done a fair amount of work and renovations, and everyone's looking for the guy, the contractor who can do everything.
Yeah.
And is like quick and honest and responsible and does good work. I got your guy, Oscar from De La Renta Painting. All I would say is when you Google De La Renta, don't necessarily trust the reviews. There's like 3 reviews, and one of them's a guy who apparently never hired Oscar and has 1 star. But Oscar's a 5-star guy, and I'll be posting my review soon. So
I just want to say, if Justin says you're a 5-star guy, you are a 6-star guy. You know what I mean?
He finished everything. I saw some things I didn't like. I took pictures of them, and I told him, hey, I want these things fixed. And he was over to the house within a couple days. He fixed everything I wanted with no complaints.
If you need a contractor, seriously, email us, and Justin will give you his contact information.
I will give you, yeah. Or Google De La Renta Painting.
I will say, to go along with your life hack, finding a contractor is super important for your house, 1.
Yep.
And 2, I would say never find someone online. Always be recommended by a friend.
Yes.
Because this was friends that you knew.
Yep, we had 2 friends that used them.
Because you want that real life experience and a real life person telling you,
yes,
this person is trustworthy.
Yes.
Finding a trustworthy person is so hard.
Yeah. This guy painted. He put in hardwoods. He put in electrical outlets. He does everything.
Man.
And then I jokingly was like, yeah, there's this tree in my backyard I want to get removed. And he's like, I've got a guy for it. Of course you do, Oscar. So there's my life hack.
Yeah, find a guy. You need a guy.
Find a guy.
Yep.
And I'm just saying Oscar should be your guy.
Yeah. And the reason I use, finding a contractor like that is really tough. But if you can find a good one, it'll save you so much money.
Yep.
Right? And so even, for example, I got my AC replaced, but I didn't go through a big company.
You got a guy.
My dad's guy.
Yeah.
And it saved me about 50%.
It's crazy.
50% of what everyone else is paying.
Yep.
Yeah. And so that's why. But if you can't, but the risk is if you find a random guy, you might pay less, but you don't know if they're going to do good work. So that's why you need the personal recommendation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. All right, so the topic today is the overturn of Roe versus Wade, and how should Christians think about and react to this? So when this happened, I was at the beach. Of course I was, because the last time I was at the beach, COVID started spiking again. We were going to go back to normal as a church.
Yep.
I was at the beach. COVID happened. This year, Roe v. Wade was overturned. So I can't wait to see what next year is.
Yes.
It'll be something.
Oh, man. An asteroid's about to hit the Earth or something. Yeah.
So I recorded this video for our church to talk about how we should respond. And I had kind of 4 points. We should celebrate, we should love, we should pray, and we should act. And so we'd like to go through those 4 points today on the podcast. And just warning in advance, the first point is going to take most of the time.
Yeah.
It's going to be abnormally long. So first, we should celebrate this decision. And I want to say we should celebrate on kind of 2 angles here. First, as Christians.
Right.
And then second, as believers in the Constitution.
Right. So I would, even before we start, I think this is an important point, and this is something that I've seen over and over again. It's just everyone is misinformed, maybe, is the big question, that people don't even understand what the overturning of Roe v. Wade even is, because I've seen people say, now all abortions are banned. I'm like, that is not what's happening. So what is actually happening? What actually happened? What is Roe v. Wade? What did it say constitutionally? And then what actually happened? So even before we get into that, I think it might be helpful for some people who may have a conception in their mind of what they've been told.
Sure.
What Roe v. Wade was and what overturning it does.
Yep.
And what actually does it do?
Yeah, great question. And we'll get into this a little more on the Constitution part. But basically, Roe v. Wade was a 1973 decision of the Supreme Court that created a federal constitutional right to abortion. And so before 1973, each state decided how to regulate abortion within their state.
Right.
At 1973, it forced all the states to enact a sweeping allowance of abortion. The overturning of it in the Dobbs decision returns the decision to the states. So realistically, it's probably actually not going to make that much of a difference in the number of abortions that happen each year, but it is significant because it puts the power to decide something so significant like this into the hands of voters in each state rather than in the hands of 9 unelected justices of the Supreme Court.
Right.
So that's what it did. It didn't outlaw it across the country. It returned the decision to the states and said to each state, now you decide what your state is going to do with abortion.
Right. I think that's just really
Very
important to just even baseline start from there.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we should celebrate. And when I use the word celebrate, I'm not meaning like a flippant throw a party, talk about how you owned the other side politically.
Yeah.
I mean like a deep rejoicing in God's kindness that an act of justice was done in our country. A serious wrong was righted federally. And so when we think of just Christian doctrine on life and abortion, Exodus 20, you shall not murder. Psalm 139, for you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Jeremiah 1:5, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. Psalm 127, children are a heritage from the Lord, offspring a reward from him. So we see biblically that life begins at conception.
Yes.
And life is precious, and all people are made in the image of God. And so this decision as Christians took us like one step closer to, as a society, valuing life the way the Bible commands that we value life.
Yeah.
And for that, we should celebrate and we should rejoice.
Right.
I think it's also important for anyone that would say, oh, this strong opposition to abortion is just a modern religious right expression in the United States. If you're saying that, I would respectfully say learn church history a little bit better. When you look at, and we'll post this, it's actually from Catholic.com. The Catholic Church has been much more on the forefront of the abortion battle than Protestants, truthfully. But they've traced historically extra biblical texts where Christians opposed abortion, and the opposition to abortion is as early as Christianity itself.
Yes.
So you have the Didache, which was basically a writing that talked about the like worship and order of the early Christian church, written in AD 70. And it talks about the command of Christians, you shall not procure an abortion, nor destroy a newborn child. The letter of Barnabas, written in AD 74, says, thou shalt not slay the child by procuring an abortion, nor again shalt thou destroy it after it is born. Tertullian in AD 197 says, in our case, a murder being once for all forbidden, we may not destroy even the fetus in the womb, while as yet the human being derives blood from other parts of the body for its sustenance. To hinder a birth is merely a speedier man-killing, nor does it matter whether you take away a life that is born or destroy one that is coming to birth. This is a man which is going to be one. You have the fruit already in its seed. So I could go on, but biblically, within the scriptures, we see life begins at conception, and life is to be valued and cherished because it's made in the image of God. And we see in church history, from as early on, Christians were known for opposing abortion and taking in vulnerable children that the rest of society wanted to. Roman citizens would leave children out in the rocks that they didn't want them, and Christians would take them in. So this is a part of like who we are, and as Christians, we should celebrate this. We should rejoice in God's kindness that there is no longer a federal requirement to allow the murdering of preborn children.
Yeah.
And the sad thing I found is it doesn't seem like a lot of Christians want to celebrate that.
Yeah.
I mean, or maybe I should say...
Clarify maybe... I agree with you. Clarify maybe the things that you've witnessed on Twitter, or the lack of.
Yeah. I guess I've seen a few things. One, I've seen some people who have been a part of the pro-life movement for a long time totally silent on this, and that's been disappointing to me. And hey, I understand, because I posted something on Facebook and it wasn't a pleasant experience, you know. So I mean, I get it, but I've seen some people that I thought would speak up about this be silent. I've seen some professing Christians that just all of a sudden are like radically pro-choice, and it kind of came out of left field to me. And then I'd say the majority of people I feel like are afraid to say that they're grateful for this.
Yeah.
A lot of Christians, I think, are like afraid to step into those cultural waters.
Yes.
And I'm saying, Christian, rejoice that life is better protected.
It is.
Rejoice.
And I would say, even in general, we talked about abortion 30 years ago. The debate was it like rare, safe, rare, and
so we want to keep abortion safe, rare, and legal. That was the talking point of the Democratic Party for the 1990s, and those people have all but vanished.
Yeah.
Joe Biden in 2003, I think, was giving an interview, and they asked about abortion, and he said, "You know what? I think we should begin by saying all abortion is a tragedy." That's how Joe Biden started. And the Joe Biden of today sounds nothing like that. So there has been a significant cultural shift on this. And I think Christians can become sometimes kind of afraid to stand on this issue. And I just want to put some steel in your spine, Christian, and say this is worth rejoicing in.
Well, it went from abortion, like you said, even Joe Biden said,
it's always a tragedy.
A tragedy
Yep.
to celebrate it as good.
I mean,
this is just a representation of a correction, towards not celebrating the murder of innocent life.
Yep.
And I think that is worth celebrating, even if in some states nothing will change.
Yep.
But also shows that there's more work to be done.
Yes.
In a sense.
Yep.
And
so I think we should celebrate as Christians that the biblical understanding of life is more closely realized than it was before.
Yes. And I would say even, we talk a lot about biblical stuff, but medically now, you would say life begins at conception.
And you know what
I mean?
I think that has been, the improvements in technology. Think about how much more clarity there is on what's in the womb of a mother now versus in 1973.
Right.
I mean, we can see things
that
we could not see back then.
And it's interesting. We'll talk about this in answering the questions, answering the challenges a little later on, but it is interesting because the narrative around abortion keeps changing.
Yeah.
From the pro-choice people, because I almost hear nothing about well, that's not a human life. It's about why I'm able to terminate this human life. That's what I hear now.
Yep.
But we still have to start with, as Christians, we say, no, that's a life.
Right.
If that's a life. That's an image bearer.
Right.
And if that's an image bearer, then that life has value. And we need to celebrate that. Anyways, so.
For sure. And I also think we should celebrate as constitutionalists. And what I mean by that is, in our country, we have a constitution, and our constitution is supposed to be the highest rule of law. And I would say Roe v. Wade, outside of the moral argument for abortion, was a really poor constitutional argument. So what Roe v. Wade did in 1973 was it kind of created a right to abortion out of thin air. So instead of using historical legal precedent, instead of pointing to something specific within the Constitution, they gave a specific right. It created this right of privacy, and it used the idea of right of privacy to create a right to an abortion. And even a very liberal justice like Ruth Bader Ginsburg admitted that the constitutional case for Roe v. Wade was very shallow. And this is something you see a lot in the desire to have justices legislate from the bench. So here's the reality of what happened in Roe v. Wade in 1973 and when it was upheld in the Casey decision, I think in 1992. 9 justices decided that abortion should be legal. So they created the right out of thin air. Instead of the pro-choice movement deciding to work to write a federal law to make the right happen. So they didn't do that. They wanted to have justices that legislated from the bench. And Roe, the overturn of Roe, is correcting just a bad court decision that was on shaky constitutional ground that should have been overturned and should never have been issued. So I celebrate this as a lover of the Constitution. And, if the left wants to create a federal right to abortion, well, okay, pass a constitutional amendment because it's not in the Constitution. So if that's what you want to do, if that's the direction you want to take, then you have to do the hard work to go there. And props to the pro-life movement for 50 years working to create a system where we were able to vet federal judge candidates better to know their thinking on the Constitution. I mean, it took a very focused work for 50 years mainly on the federal bench and then the Supreme Court
Right.
to get here. And so I celebrate that. The work of 50 years.
Yeah.
Well done.
And just to, be clear too, in case someone calls you a Christian nationalist, because I feel like this is where we're at in our society, you know what I mean, is that here's the reality. Like, should you say Christians should hold the Constitution as the highest document in our lives? No, because that's the Bible.
Right.
But it is the set of rules that our country abides by and was founded on. So it's another argument entirely to say, should every country have the same constitution as us? The reality is that's the amount of rules that we have to abide by as a citizen of this country.
Yeah, I mean,
yes. And so we celebrate that by the rules that were set, it was improperly put in, and now it has been rightly, from a constitutional standpoint, been corrected.
I would say Romans 13, let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except for God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. I'd say that the highest governing authority in America is the Constitution.
Right.
And so that's what we should submit to, and I would argue that Roe v. Wade did not properly submit to our highest governing authority, which is the Constitution. So, yeah. I mean, if that makes me a Christian nationalist, I don't know. But
I don't think it does. I'm just saying people will accuse you of such things in 2022.
Right. And so since there was the 10th Amendment to the Constitution, the last of the Bill of Rights, says that the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. So the constitutional argument against abortion is not named as a federal right.
Right.
Therefore, this discussion belongs to the states or to the people. And that's exactly what the overturn is doing. It's putting it back in its proper constitutional place, which is this is not a right directly nor indirectly mentioned in the Constitution. Therefore, the right place to deal with this is at the state level and amongst the people voting to decide this for themselves. So for all the people that wants to say that democracy is in danger because of this decision, everything just got more democratic. Like, you actually get to vote to elect representatives in your state to decide this issue. So don't give me that.
And plus, we're a constitutional republic anyways. So even what you just said is like, people are like, democracy is being whatever, but I'm like, we're not in a true democracy. We never have been.
Right. This is a constitutional republic. You elect people to make decisions for you. We do not vote on every single issue.
So it's not just like your democracy is being taken away. It's just like it's been the same for the past since 1776. This is how it has been done.
Right.
It's just, I guess we're parsing words here now, but I think understanding that is important.
Yeah. Well, it is interesting too on this. I don't, everyone knows politics is my hobby horse. So I got to be careful as a pastor. But during Obama's presidency, he had the White House, the House, and the Senate. He had everything. He had a full government under Democratic control. And if I remember correctly, he said he wanted to codify Roe v. Wade. This is something that is typical talking points on the left. And he never did. So, again, credit to the pro-life movement. They have been very focused for 50 years on judges and justices to get to this decision. And then now they need to kind of rearrange and focus more on states, which is kind of the next phase of it. But the cultural left, the political left, if they had been as focused on doing this through a democratic process rather than relying on the Supreme Court to decide the way they wanted it to, maybe we'd be in a different state. Maybe there would be a federal law protecting abortion, but they never did it. So again, this is we have a constitution. There are ways to change things.
Can I ask from a political standpoint? Let's say, the justices in 20 years becomes, or 10 years becomes more left-leaning again. Can they overturn this overturned? How many times can you do this?
Right. Snip, snap, snip, snap.
Yeah.
for those of you who've watched The Office. Yes, they could.
Interesting. So they can just keep overturning.
I mean,
I wonder if that's where we're headed.
The court tends to not like to do that. And even if you read the opinions or heard about the opinions, Justice Roberts, who's the Chief Justice, intends to prefer like protecting the institution and like limiting change. Justice Roberts didn't want to go this far. Justice Roberts wanted to overturn part of Roe and keep another part. But that was kind of his fear, is he doesn't want the like back and forth of it all. But yeah, technically that could happen. So yeah, you got to keep your eye on the courts in a lot of ways.
Interesting.
So yeah, first we should celebrate as Christians, and then as people who appreciate the Constitution and fall under the Constitution. But like we've mentioned, we have seen just a lot of people who really hate that Christians would rejoice in this and really feel like it's the end of the world. And so we want to kind of spend a fair amount of time answering maybe challenges and objections to the idea that you would celebrate this decision.
And I've even seen some people post like, I'm a Christian and here's why I'm pro-choice.
Yeah.
And I would say if you're a Christian, you should be pro-life.
Yeah, we don't get to decide what Christian doctrine is.
Yes.
And Christian doctrine is life is valued from womb to tomb.
And mostly what I've seen is I have not seen anyone who's pro-choice really address the pro-life. Like, basically there's one pro-life argument. What is the killing of innocent life called? Murder. And murder should be illegal. That's like what the pro-choice or the pro-life movement. That's the one argument.
That is a life inside your womb. Yeah.
I rarely see, if any, in the past month, one pro-choice person actually argue with that.
Yeah, kind of talk on different. Yeah.
I've heard a lot of like talking points I've seen in the media or social media, and that's what we're going to address. So if you're a Christian, you've probably seen a lot of these posts. Like, there's a post going around that's like, I don't support murdering babies. I support Becky, who had a whatever, like this kind of pregnancy, or like Shelly, who got raped at 11 or whatever. And so we're gonna address like the most common talking points and how we as Christians can respond.
Yep.
And ultimately, the way, and I'll throw it out there, spoiler alert. Really, every argument is it's always wrong to murder babies.
Yeah.
I mean, it really comes down to that.
Yep.
But we're gonna give some logical arguments and some stats and stuff too.
Yeah. So first kind of objection, Christians aren't pro-life, they're just pro-birth. And by the way, we're getting a lot of these from, we're going to link this, Not the Bee. They've given a primer for all of this.
Yeah, it's a guy who put together, I think it was like 8 or 9 points, and he has these graphs and stuff too. It's really helpful.
So Christians aren't really pro-life, they're just pro-birth. So this is not true. 2% of all U.S. households adopt children. 5% of practicing Christians do.
Yes.
So Christians adopt at over twice the amount
that non-Christians do.
Yeah.
And then same with giving to the poor. 65% of Christians give to the poor, opposed to 41% of non. And then Christians give charitably at a much higher rate as non-Christians.
Yeah.
And so for you to say Christians aren't pro-life, they're only pro-birth, it's just statistically just not true.
Yep.
Especially as you compare it to everyone else in society, Christians are more than twice more pro-life than everyone else.
And this, like I said, this has been a part of the ethos of Christianity from the beginning.
Right.
And one thing I think we do need to stay away from, that I've seen this argument some, is, okay, Christians, now it's time to step up. And I get you. Like I'm like, yes, we should do even more now than before. But let's not make it sound like we're not doing things already.
Yes. People make it seem like Christians weren't doing anything, whereas we're blowing everyone else away already. Yes. Now there's just more to do.
Yes.
More of what I'm already we're doing.
Yes.
Keep doing it.
Yes. And then the other thing that I would just totally reject is this, well, I can't celebrate this until we also have universal health care and ... and ... and ... And hey, like I appreciate there are different views on how to best care for the poor. We can acknowledge that, right? Is it government? Is it private charity? Like, what's the best way to care for the poor in society? That's a debate we can have.
Right.
But it is totally illogical and unfair to say we can't celebrate and we can't rejoice in an unjust law being overturned until we also pass all these other laws that half of Christians would disagree with anyway.
Right.
So
yeah, I've seen
don't
that
give
a
me
lot,
that.
where people are like, if you were really pro-life, you also have to
support
agree
this specific bill to
with these policies.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, no, you can be pro-life, and I think I think you can be a Christian and say, I'm pro-life and believe in universal health care.
Sure.
I also think you can be a Christian and say, I'm pro-life and think the best way to care for that life is through churches and places like Beacon of Hope and North Fulton Community Charities. Instead of taxing me to do this, I want to give myself to do this. Just because it's not like you conceded this thing about me being pro-life, so now I have to concede all of my policies to agree with your policies. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Second one is basically men are forcing their will on women.
Yes. And really, statistically, women are more likely than men to identify as pro-life. And then he says, which leads to headlines like, why are women more opposed to abortion? And it's interesting to see this too, because if you see like the pro-life rallies that was happening, it was mainly women.
Right.
It was crazy.
Yep.
And then I read all these articles too about how these more like CNN, NBC types were like, reporters were really confused why all these women were so pro-life. Mm-hmm. And really what you just see is, and you can look here, women are more likely to identify than men as pro-life.
Yep.
So men forcing the abortions is just not statistically true.
Yep.
Yeah.
It is interesting. There was another, I think it was like a Harvard poll that just recently came out on the abortion topic. And it shows how uninformed a lot of Americans are. So a majority of people wanted Roe v. Wade to stay in this poll, okay? But then like 73% of Americans said they favored a ban on abortion after 15 weeks, which means you don't want Roe to stay because that's different than what Roe said. And I believe more women than men favored that.
Right.
So yeah, that's not a correct talking point.
It's, we've talked about the illusion of explanatory depth, that we all think that we can explain things better than we can. And I think that's what's happening here too, that most people I don't even think really know what Roe v. Wade did.
Right. Yes.
Yep. I mean, I think that
that's what it shows.
Proves that. And I think it's interesting to point out too, like, Roe v. Wade was initially instituted by 9 men.
Right. There's some irony there.
In that, there's some irony. Yeah.
There's a lot of irony there.
You just say overturn. There's women on the Supreme Court now, and given only one voted to overturn it. But
now the women in states can vote for specific people that either are for it or against it, and can decide in their state. So. Next myth, this one I feel like is pretty prevalent.
It is.
My body, my choice.
Yes.
And I say 100%. But this is another body.
Yes, and that's what people don't...
That's the difference.
Yes, is... that baby has its own body and its own life.
Its own DNA.
And we see that scripturally, we talked about that.
Yeah.
But medically, we see that too.
Right.
That's what they would say medically now too. That baby's alive.
You have a different heartbeat.
Yeah.
It's not your heartbeat.
Yeah.
It's a baby's heartbeat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I always think it's like funny because like, it's a conservative, it's a right-wing talking point, but it is ironically funny to me about how like where was this argument when you were talking about the vaccines?
Right.
I just think it's funny. Like
It is.
like I'm not saying it's a good argument. I'm just pointing out the irony.
No,
it's
there's
funny.
a lot of yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we would just say, well, yeah, like you do have your choice over your own medical procedures, but when, but that's another life.
Right.
What about their body, their
Yes,
choice?
right. Exactly. We're
Right?
not talking and if I mean you want to talk about women's rights, well, what about the 50%? Assume on average out of
Right.
all the abortions, 50% are women.
Right.
So what about all of the women who have lost their lives, never given the chance to really begin life,
Right.
because they were aborted?
Yeah.
So I mean,
Think about
right?
all
I
the
mean, you want to talk about
millions
women's rights,
and millions of women,
right?
who were aborted.
Yep.
But I would say too, some people make the viability argument.
Sure.
Well, that baby is a human, it's a person, but they're not viable.
Right.
But I'm like, at what point where do you draw the line there? Because I'll tell you what, I've had 3 kids, and if I didn't take care of my babies, they would have died even post-birth.
Yep.
So at what point do you count them as useful in society? Like, no, that's crazy.
Well, and let's just be honest here. The society that does that at pre-birth and birth will eventually do that
Post.
at pre-death.
Oh, yes.
So,
yes, yeah.
I just think of like my grandfather who really suffered toward the end of his life. And I mean, he couldn't go to the bathroom on his own, had to have 2 or 3 nurses pick him up, and just really like painful, degrading, humiliating things. So are you saying, because he can't go to the bathroom by himself and needs someone to help him eat, like do we need to just let him go? Like, is his life no longer valuable? And I think, honestly, that's where when you begin to say life should be protected once it can, like, perform on its own, if you do that pre-birth, you're eventually going to do that pre-death. And elderly people that need help, you just, it's just time to cut them off. We
Right.
just give them a pill and let them die because... Right. And that's horrific. I mean, that's not a society I want to be a part of.
Yeah.
So...
one more argument I've seen with this too is, have you seen that people give that now? It's like an illustration, like pro-life people don't really believe, pre-birth embryos or babies are real humans. For example, like if you had one adult in a burning building with 50 embryos, which one are you going to save?
Right.
And I would say, first of all, that's just like, that's kind of like a red herring type argument.
Yep.
Because first of all, like the answer is I would try to save all of them.
Sure.
So first of all, we start there.
Yeah.
But secondly, you have to make the best quick decision morally there. So like, for example, like their like gotcha moment is like, you would save the one, born kid. But I was like, but here's all these different arguments too. Is it my kid or someone else's kid?
Sure.
Right? Is it if that kid only has 30 minutes more to live anyways?
Sure.
Maybe you do pick the embryos. I'm just saying, like, to me, I'm like, it's not a gotcha statement because 1, there's not enough information. 2, it's like a pretend scenario to try to catch you in a thing, but it like to trap you. But honestly, it's just not it's an impossible moral choice.
Yep.
It's a philosophical like thought experiment.
Well, and
right?
I think if we could go to the next myth, I think that kind of ties in,
covers it
to your illustration here. The next myth: most abortions are about poverty, health complications, and rape. And in this statistics that are given, Florida is one of the few states that records reasons for every abortion. 75% were listed as no reason or elective.
Right. And 20%, almost 21%, the women aborted for social economic reasons.
Right.
I mean, that's like the 95%, vast majority is just for convenience, essentially.
And it's like, I'm not minimizing the like horrific position some women find themselves in who are already in poverty and who, you know, got pregnant and husband or boyfriend or whatever is not going to play any role, and they're like, I can't even feed myself. Like let's just start off by saying for those 20% in Florida, like that's a horrible place to be.
Yes.
And an awful place to live.
Yeah.
And but let's also say, okay, let's help those women. Let's help them economically. And we can debate on, you know, private charity versus government or whatever. But surely the solution is not
murder.
Get rid of the baby.
Yeah.
Right? But yeah, 75% no reason or elective, 20% economic reasons. Listen to this. 0.15% rape.
Not 1.5%. 0.15%.
0.15%. And again, right? I mean, both of us have daughters. Like, I can't imagine. It is beyond my comprehension.
Yes.
To imagine one of my girls when they're 12, 13 years old. I can't imagine the pain and the hurt. I just, it's beyond me. But just for a moment, like, because what often happens in this discussion, you say, I'm grateful the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade.
Right.
And you say, well, now all the people getting raped, you know. And that is a conversation to have, but let's keep it in perspective of the whole. We're talking about 75% of abortions saying no reason just because elective, 0.15% on rape.
And to be fair, the 74.9%, the no reason could just be they didn't feel like telling us.
Sure.
Right. So, yeah.
And then we're dealing with 0.01% on incest.
Yeah.
So rape and incest tend to be the flags that are flown.
Right.
And again, I'm not minimizing the awful pain that is involved in that and, and just the horrible conversations that come as a result. But I'm saying let's just remember what we're dealing with here. And it is interesting if you try to turn just for like argument's sake with someone and say, okay, just for argument's sake, let's say we'll allow abortion for rape and incest. Are you comfortable with banning it then? If those two things are allowed, but everything else is not allowed, are you comfortable? The answer is always no. Well, no. So that's what's used as the reason we have to have abortion.
Right.
Rape, incest, life of the mother.
Right.
And I'd say life of the mother is really already guaranteed in almost.
It is.
You know,
because I wouldn't say that's murder. That's self-defense.
Right.
Yeah. You've morally come to a different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So even for the sake of the argument, if you say just for the argument's sake, if we allow these three things, would you be fine banning that 75%? The answer is always no. And I think that's pretty telling that it's really not about those three things.
Right. Yes, you're using an outlier to inform a normal point. You never do that with anything.
Right.
You never let your outliers make your decision for the normal, right? Yeah. And you know, and I would say with like social economic, we want to be people who love and care for those who are in poverty and are vulnerable in any way.
Right.
I've only talked to one person who is pro-choice who said, I believe abortion is murder, and I believe those moms should be able to murder their babies if they're in that position.
You had one person that said
one
that?
person who has said that to me.
Yeah.
And I was like both like a little horrified by the candor, but also I was like, at least you're consistent with your point.
Yep.
But I think the problem with that for me is, where do you stop? At what point if that is allowed, if that makes you more poor, does anything that makes me more poor, can I kill it?
I'd prefer to give them an upper class childhood rather than a middle class.
Right.
Yeah, like where do you draw the line?
But not even for babies, like for adults.
Yep.
You say homeless people are a drain on society's resources.
Oh, sure. Okay, I got you.
At what point do you?
Yep.
I'm like,
it's really time to cut them off too.
Yeah, I'm like, no, I don't think we should. I'm very against genocide against homeless people because they're in a bad, poor situation.
Yep. Well, yeah.
Right. But also, like, you know, I've just seen all these stories that's so interesting about like, you're basically saying like poor people have no intrinsic value.
Yes.
I'm like, what?
Yes. That you know, or in you go
or disabilities or whatever.
Disabilities,
like,
you go down that route. Well,
like,
they would have had
man, gosh, like you'd rather kill someone with Down syndrome than let them live. I bet all the people with Down syndrome disagree with you.
Yeah.
Right?
Tragic.
I'm like,
Tragic.
no, we're saying those people who are poor, who are rich, who have disabilities, who don't have disabilities, they all matter.
Yes.
And have life.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Next myth, and I've seen this one a lot. Maybe this has become the new talking point, the new most frequented talking point, which is ectopic pregnancies.
Right.
Women are going to die now because they can't have ectopic pregnancies, or if they have a miscarriage, that they're going to die from the miscarriage.
Right.
That's what's being often repeated. And the answer is that's false.
Right.
An ectopic pregnancy is not an abortion.
So, yes. So the narrative have changed once again. Now, medically, you would say that that baby is a life.
Yep.
Like, right?
Yep.
That baby has a life.
Yep.
So it's no longer about murder or not. It's gone to this ectopic pregnancy stuff. Well, first of all, we would say statistically incredibly rare, right? But secondly, from the research we've done, none of the laws prohibit those.
There was, it's interesting. There was some concern about a bill in Missouri, and so I looked it up, and they changed the language back in March. But here's the thing. So I'll admit this. I will admit this, okay? And maybe more conservatives should admit this first, which is for the last 50 years, it has been safe to be pro-life without having any consequences to that. Meaning you could wave the banner, you could say all the talking points,
right,
but it didn't matter because Roe v. Wade was a settled law of the land and nothing was going to change.
Well, not law, right?
Well, they called it the settled case law. Yeah. And nothing was going to change. So you could say all these things, what you would do if you were in charge, and it didn't matter. A lot of these Republican-led states passed bills in the last 3 years anticipating the overturn of Roe. And some of them were hastily written and weren't very thoughtful because they knew nothing was going to change. So they gave some red meat to their base on the kind of stuff they wanted to see. And it didn't matter anyway because Roe wasn't overturned. Well, now it is overturned. And I do think this is a moment that demands a certain level of seriousness, which wasn't always present.
Right.
That now the laws that states are writing and passing actually affect people's lives.
Right.
So I just want to go ahead and say, I'll give on the fact that some of these laws were hastily written and hastily passed. And there's probably going to be, Roe v. Wade has been the way of the country for 50 years. So it's going to be a bumpy ride for a few years as we figure out, as a society, how this works in a post-Roe world. And there's going to be plenty of challenges in the courts, and it's going to be bumpy.
Right.
And legislators are going to have to come to agreement in these states. Even pro-life states are going to, and pro-life legislators are going to have trouble agreeing on things.
Right.
And that's just a reality of how far do you come back?
Right.
But it's just not true to say that an ectopic pregnancy is an abortion, that a miscarriage is an abortion, that treatment for septic uterus is an abortion. So this is a talking point being thrown out a lot.
Yeah.
And it seems to be the new favorite one. It's just not true.
It's just, there's a difference between morally and medically between losing a baby and murdering a baby.
Yes.
Let's just put it out there.
Yeah, it's
right?
just blunt, stark
It's
terms.
funny because none of this was a talking point until 2 months ago or a month ago.
No one was talking about ectopic pregnancy.
And for example, a miscarriage, no one ever
calls that an abortion.
Says miscarriage and abortion is the same thing, right? And then here's the thing with the left talking points is redefining language. Yes. There's this constant redefining of language. No one was calling these ectopic pregnancies and miscarriages and septic uterus. No one was calling those things abortion before a month ago. It was just a change of language to put it under the brush
to scare people.
To scare people.
Yes.
Yeah, none of those things. And no one says let the woman die if they have an ectopic pregnancy.
I don't know a single
I've not seen a single person
elected official who's like, what I'd like to do is outlaw miscarriages. What are you talking about?
Yeah. Or anyone on Facebook, even my most conservative Facebook friends, no one's like, yeah, just let the woman die.
And, we both have known people who have had miscarriages, and it's such a painful experience to like make light, to hijack an entire population who has suffered from miscarriages and put them front and center in this debate. It is just
it's evil.
Is an evil thing to do.
Yeah.
Next myth, this is a good one. This is just racist white supremacy.
I just can't.
And here's the argument, right? Well, rich white people will always have the money to travel across state lines to get an abortion, so they'll be fine. But it's the poor people who won't be able to travel across state lines, who are typically not white, who will suffer the most. That's how the argument usually goes.
And I would say, just for example, first of all, we talked about this in our other abortion podcast like a couple of years ago. Like Margaret Sanger, who started Planned Parenthood, was a racist who purposely.
I think we should read some of these quotes.
Let's do it.
I'll read them. This is from Margaret Sanger, founder of Planned Parenthood. We don't want the word to go out that we want to exterminate the Negro population.
Gosh.
Next quote. I accepted an invitation to talk to the women's branch of the KKK after a dozen invitations to speak at similar groups were proffered. Quote, birth control must lead ultimately to a cleaner race. I just can't. Just awful.
Yes, I can't even deal with this.
Even if you say, well, Planned Parenthood is repented of the comments of its founder or whatever, but like literally one of the reasons Planned Parenthood was started by Margaret Sanger was to target black communities to slow down their reproduction.
Right.
That's just a fact. And so statistically, abortion kills more minority children than any other population segment.
Sure, and I think it's almost 50% of abortions are African Americans. And if you think about it, the African American population is only 14% of the American population currently. And if you ask, how come in the last 50 years, 100 years, why is that not increased? It's because they account for half of the abortions.
Wow.
I mean, think about that.
Yeah. Wow. That's
yeah. It's like you talk about what kills the most black people.
Right.
It's abortions.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's yeah.
I mean that myth. I mean, it's just not true.
It's just
the white supremacist thing. Yeah.
I do love this next thing on Not the Bee. It says, demand. If they restrict abortion, they should make it illegal for men to desert women after getting them pregnant. If women can't back out of pregnancies, men shouldn't be able to either. And the response is a meme with a guy saying, your terms are acceptable. Yeah, this is what we call marriage. This is like throughout Scripture. Like, yeah, I'm totally in support of that.
Yeah, and I've also seen women, I was going to talk about this later, but that are like, all right, women, we got to get together and no sex with a dude unless you're like married or ready to get pregnant. I'm like, yes.
Yeah.
You've created biblical, like moral ethics on sexuality here.
My favorite response was like, man, the overturn of Roe v. Wade really is going to impact the LGBTQ community. And I was like, okay, in 5th grade, I had this sex ed class in my school, and I learned how babies were born. And it involved 2 heterosexual people. I don't know how to say this to you, but I don't think this is going to affect you. Like saying that. Yeah. scientifically,
just medically,
it's not going to happen.
Right.
Anyway, I digress. Next myth, a radical minority is imposing its will on a majority of America. We already mentioned this, 71%, over 70% favor some kind of restrictions.
Yeah.
So...
And it's like what you said earlier, where most people say they want Roe v. Wade, but most people want restrictions.
Yeah, so
and really, you just yeah. It's just a misunderstanding.
Next myth: banning abortion doesn't decrease it.
And this is something I've seen too, where I mean, you mentioned that a lot of the states that are abortion is the heaviest done are going to just keep it. But also I've seen the argument that's, you can't ban abortion, only safe abortions. I've seen that. Right. And I just, from a moral argument, you just got to say, well, that's just silly. Like we wouldn't say well, you shouldn't ban murder because then you'll only have murders in back alleys. And I'm like, well, yes, murders still happen.
Yep.
But that's a good thing that they're not openly happening. Like, I would love to get it to zero, but, understanding sin nature.
Right.
Murder in general now has to be done covertly and quiet, and it stops many people from murdering people, and that's a good thing.
Yes. I think here's my kind of general rule on responses about abortion. If you replaced abortion with slavery, would the argument stand?
Right.
So think about this. A lot of people said, we can't we can't celebrate this. We can't rejoice in this decision because, a lot of people, it's going to put them in a vulnerable, a lot of women are in vulnerable states right now. And again, I'm not trying to minimize the experiences of economically and otherwise vulnerable women across the country right now. I could see how it could be scary for you. At the same time, could you imagine after the Emancipation Proclamation was passed, after the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment was passed, a pastor standing up and saying to his congregation, guys, 13th, 14th Amendment came down Congress today. The Constitution's been changed. We just can't celebrate this because think about how vulnerable this is going to make all of the plantation owners in our congregation. All their labor is gone now. What are they going to do? They're going to be economically destitute. This is going to have economic ripple effects in our entire economy because there's not going to be enough food.
I would guess that people did say that, and we would say, that's morally wrong.
That's horrible.
That's
right?
horrible.
So, I'm saying we can look back and we would say, oh gosh, hopefully, surely no one would say that. And I guarantee you they did. So don't be that guy on the abortion discussion.
Yeah.
When in 100 years people look back and they said, really? That's what they said about preborn life? That was your argument? So, yeah, and same thing with banning abortion doesn't decrease it. It's and I know I have heard that it's probably a better comparison. Prohibition is probably a better comparison than slavery, which I think is probably fair to the abortion discussion, at least on your ability to hide it. Right. I do think there's a good bit of that. But yeah, it's the same thing of even if that's true, you outlaw murder. It's
Yeah, it is.
And it's why can't you have both? Why can't we both work on the economic side to help people that are impoverished?
Right.
And
right.
Have restrictions on it on a legal sense.
Yeah.
You don't have to choose.
And once again here, for the people who are the safe abortion stuff, I'm all of these laws are allowing women whose life is in danger or whose baby is already dead or have no organs or whatever. All of these laws allow for those medical exceptions.
Yep.
But they're exceptions.
Right.
That's what I'm saying.
Right.
You have to come up with the overarching law and then you come up with the exceptions.
Yes.
Right?
Well, it's just again, back to the slavery thing, and this was an argument, right, in the pre-Civil War era, which I mean maybe had some merit, but it makes me cringe a little bit, right? Which is like, well, let's not ban it. Let's the new states that are admitted into the Union, let's not have them have slavery, and maybe over time this thing will kind of fizzle out. And I'm like, no, this is a morally repugnant practice,
Right.
that should have been exterminated from the beginning of our country, and there's no room for this.
Right.
Ironically, what just happened is less radical than that. What just happened is actually, well, we'll just let each state decide.
Yeah.
That's what just happened.
It's much less
It's
radical.
much less, right? So, yeah.
Yeah.
Separation of church and state.
So I've heard this argument. I don't know if you've seen this. Oh, well,
Don't impose your views on me.
you're opposing your religion on everyone, and so we should tax the churches. I'm like, well, first of all, you do not understand the separation of church and state, because it was actually written
To protect the church.
to protect the church.
Right.
Secondly, the tax write-offs isn't because of the separation of church and state. The tax write-off is because the government allows any nonprofit that provides services to the community to not pay taxes, which all churches still do.
Yep.
And then thirdly, it's a silly argument, because if I can't take my quote-unquote religion, it's just like people once again are just hijacking terms.
Yep.
Because I'm like, well, you have a religion too. Your religion just consists of abortion and blah,
Yes.
blah, 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 blah. So if I can't take my religion, you can't take yours, and then we have nothing.
Yep.
Right? And I really think what people mean is a worldview. Everyone has a worldview, and you take your worldview with you into...
It's impossible not to.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so for you to say, well, you can't take you impose your religion on me, I'm like, Roe v. Wade was imposing your religion on me.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's just, like it's a silly argument in
Yep.
my opinion.
For sure. And this isn't an objection, I guess, but an argument, I guess, about taking responsibility.
Yeah, something I think that's not addressed with any of these arguments is that no one is taking responsibility. It's like no one gets pregnant on like accident. What I mean is like you're not sitting there one day. So like there is a TV show called The Umbrella Academy, and it starts with like 43 women are doing normal day things, and all of a sudden they have 9 months of pregnancy in like 30 seconds, and then they birth these kids like right away. That's how the show starts.
Okay.
That does not happen in real life.
Right.
You're not like sitting there on the bus and all of a sudden you're pregnant.
Yeah.
Right? Like you get pregnant from
Sex.
yeah. I didn't know if you knew this. Right? But what
60% of the time, every time.
But people aren't talking about how those are choices. You want to talk about choices?
Yes.
That's a choice you make.
And again, we not to make light of, you do have this category of rape.
Yes.
Where you did not have a choice.
Right. Yeah.
And we're
Once again, that's an outlier.
That's
And
an outlier,
We
and
want to be cognizant of
can't
that.
imagine how painful that is.
Yes.
But for the vast majority, and
For the vast
we're
majority.
talking the 99% majority here.
Yeah.
You made a choice to have sex, and let's also say, right, that biblically speaking, sexual immorality is sin. So any sexual activity outside of marriage is sinful.
Right.
So you made a sin choice, and the choice to have sex involves the possibility of offspring. So
Well, I'm even thinking here, I'm like, even if you're not a Christian and you're like believing that you're like a Darwinianist,
sure,
even in your worldview,
sex leads to babies.
yeah,
Yes.
and that's a good thing because it passes your genes. Like I just
Right.
like, and so to me, there's no talking about. Right. And we would say, the abortion argument goes alongside with sexual ethics.
Yep.
Because if, and now I understand, like there are many people who go to church and claim to be Christians, and some that maybe even are Christians who had sex
Sure.
outside of marriage and all this stuff.
Sure.
Like it's not just like, oh, Christians are quote unquote perfect and
Yeah.
do this things. It's just there's consequences to your actions. And I say
one of them.
consequences in a good and bad way.
Yeah.
But a consequence of sex can be pregnancy.
Right.
But no one's taking the responsibility for that.
Part of our, and this is actually a broader cultural topic, and I remember years ago talking to my Catholic grandparents about this, who were thrilled at my observations and conclusions. But we've divorced marriage from child rearing, which is a problem.
Right.
And we, as even Christians, kind of created this normalization of marriages that maybe you don't have children. And I'm not saying that, obviously, infertility, we're not talking about that, but like conscious choice to not have children as a Christian. I'm not saying there can't be good biblical reasons for that. I'm saying they're probably in the slim minority.
Right.
So that's one thing we've done. And part of that has been around contraception and the pill and a lot of these conversations that, decades and decades ago just weren't. We as a society in general, even a Christian part of our society, kind of views children as a nuisance rather than a blessing. And so we've separated marriage from child rearing, and we've separated sex from marriage.
Right.
And so you have like 2 degrees of, and so we've created sex to be a recreational thing that people who are attracted to each other do.
Right.
That has nothing to do with the covenant of marriage and has nothing to do with the blessing of child rearing.
Right.
And I would say we're reaping all that we have sown as a society on that. And
once again, we
here
didn't
we are.
accidentally arrive here.
Yes.
Right. There are things that in history from the past 50, 100 years that has led to this point.
Yeah. So, and so kind of in conclusion, I guess, like we start with it's wrong to take innocent life. Thou shalt not murder. And then you build the case from there. And you got a life inside of you. Yeah. So let's start from there.
Yeah. And that's the argument I would say almost all pro-life people are making.
Right.
That's a life.
That's where we start.
And the killing of innocent life is called murder.
Yep.
With exceptions of self-defense and there's all these things.
Right.
Like there's a couple of exceptions, right?
So here's my kind of prophecy on here's what I think the problem is that we're going to run into moving forward as a society. I think the Christian case is crystal clear. Life begins at conception.
Right.
Many in our society don't agree with that. So, but what is ironic, if you found what is in the womb of a mother at 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks on Mars.
Oh, yeah.
It'd make the headlines, life on Mars. Just want to throw that out there.
It's like one bacteria on Mars has more value than a human baby in the womb. So
I just want to, But so what I do, so I think the Christian argument's crystal clear. Now becomes the struggle of how do you legislate that? And what do pro-life legislators do? Where do you draw the line?
Right.
And I think that's going to be harder because there's not a societal consensus that life begins at conception.
Right.
That's the Christian position, but I would say society's probably more gray on that. And so we're going to get into pray part, because we do need to pray for our legislators to have wisdom to enact justice.
Right.
And that's going to be hard to build consensus on that, I personally think.
Right.
But we'll see. So that's kind of our first part. We should celebrate this decision as Christians, as people who love the Constitution, and then hopefully we were able to give you some fodder on how to answer some challenges to that celebration. Secondly, and we're going to go through 2, 3, and 4 pretty quick. Secondly, we should love.
Yeah.
We should love everybody. Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself.
Yep.
Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you.
Yep.
So we should love those who have had abortions in the past. I think we should really recognize.
We should absolutely love. Yeah.
I think this whole conversation, for them, it's like sticking a knife into an old wound.
Right.
Because everyone's talking about this, and you did this in your past, recent or very far away, and there's certain pain and shame associated with that. I think we need to love people that are in those positions. I think we need to love those who radically want to keep abortion as the law of the land. We want to love those who hate our pro-life stance and who semi-persecute us for that stance. We should not, as Christians, divulge into the culture of hate. We're people of love. We should speak the truth, but we do it in love, and we should love those who are our enemies.
You know what's funny? Our culture says today, if you don't agree with me 100%, you hate me, so I hate you.
Right.
And I'm like, that's not, I would tell them that's not Christian, but for a Christian, that's absolutely not Christian, right? That's like, yeah, you love your enemies. Yeah, for sure.
100%.
Who disagree with you.
Next, we need to pray. Pray for women who have had abortions and are ashamed. Pray that, people with this past sin would know the grace of Christ, would come to him in repentance and faith and know the healing that only Jesus can offer. Pray for our leaders in our culture who want to continue abortions. Pray that the Lord would change their mind, convict them of their stance. Pray for wisdom for state legislators to enact just laws. And this is what I was talking about, is gets very complicated of, the Christian position is life begins at conception.
Right.
Can you get enough votes to write that into a bill in your state house?
Right.
I'm going to say probably not in most states.
Yeah.
So then you're going to have to say, well, when? So this is and then there's a whole movement that wants to criminalize abortions in the sense of we want to put women who've had abortions in jail. And what they're arguing on is, well, if it's murder,
right?
But that gets really hairy. How do you know someone had an abortion, and how can you prove it? And do you turn neighbor against neighbor? And so it's just a lot. It's going to take a lot of wisdom to write laws that they can get enough consensus on to pass,
right? And
that protect the preborn. I mean, it's a tough job.
Yep.
So pray for them. Pray for wisdom. And finally, act. Like we said, Christians are already acting, have been for generations, and we just want to even more up the game. So get involved in your local crisis pregnancy center. Give to them. We're adding a partnership at our church, Beacon of Hope Crisis Pregnancy Center.
Yeah.
Great ministry. Get involved in foster care. Get involved in adoption.
Yeah.
Get involved and care for the poor and marginalized in your city.
Yeah.
Do it all. Or maybe I'd say pick one thing and try to,
Right.
So we need to act.
And I would add to that, it's important who you vote for. We've talked about now it's gone to the states, and
you need to consider this as a major act of justice in your state, and how that's going to be played out in the candidates that you select.
Yeah, and I remember we talked 2 years ago in the 2020 election. We were like, how can you vote for this side? And the argument was, oh, well, nothing's going to happen.
Well, now something's going to happen.
And now I think that's been proven wrong. And I think you got to be really careful to say, if someone is trying to push to term abortions, can you really vote for that person? I mean, I can't get there. Right. And so who you vote for matters, and look at all the issues. And this one's got to be a major one for us as Christians.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well said. So this might be our longest podcast ever. That's an hour, 13 minutes so far.
Nice. I think we've had one up there.
Maybe. Yeah. But this is a big issue, and we wanted to get to it earlier. Frankly, but I was on vacation. Yeah. I'll just be honest.
And I'll say this too. We don't know who's listening to this. I think it's mostly people from our church and believers that listen to it. But we really do want to have discussions over these things. But if you're just going to come and attack us, we're not going to respond to you.
Yeah, we're happy to have discussions, sometimes heated discussions, but not. We're just not going to take.
Yeah, if you're gonna come and attack us on social media or whatever, we'll just block you.
Yeah.
So, but if you're actually trying to have a discussion, ask us questions, us ask you questions, actually talk about these things in a respectful manner. And maybe that word respect is the one we're going to throw out there. But we understand this is a polarizing thing, but if Yeah.
And I would love to close with this, which is I would like to directly talk to women who are listening who have had abortions, or men who are listening who paid for women to have an abortion. And what you need to know is that you sinned against a holy and mighty God in that act. You committed murder. You took a life. And the scriptures say, thou shalt not murder. And you stand before a holy and just and mighty God guilty of that sin. And that's not your only sin, but that certainly is one of them. And because of that sin and your many sins, you deserve the judgment of God. And we need to sit there and recognize that. All sinners stand in that. Every single human being stands in the same boat as you. But that is a sin that you committed. But there is hope for you in Christ, that Jesus Christ came and he lived a perfect life among us, a life without sin, without any stain or wrinkle or blemish. And he went to the cross and he died to take God's judgment on our behalf. So if you will trust in Christ, if you will repent of your sins and believe in him and trust in him and look to him, the judgment that you should receive for that abortion and every other sin you've committed was laid on Christ instead of you.
Yeah. If you're wondering, how do I not feel this shame?
Yes.
How do I avoid this condemnation?
If you look to Christ,
yeah.
If you trust in him because of his work, because of his cross, because of his death, his burial, and his resurrection, there is therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus.
Yeah.
You do not need to feel or experience condemnation for your sin, because Christ took your sin on the cross if you will believe in him. And you do not have to feel shame, because Christ has cleansed you and he's covered you and he's healed you. And so you can be forgiven, healed, and whole if you look to Jesus.
Yeah.
And so that's our offer to you today. For those of you who have had abortions listening to this, or those of you who have maybe paid for someone you got pregnant to have an abortion, is you did sin in that. But there is grace and healing available to you at the cross because of what Jesus has done.
Yeah.
So come to him and look to him to be forgiven and made clean.
Yeah.
So thanks for listening to us for today. We'll be back soon with other musings about other stuff.